Over the last 20 years, the rise of technology has been the most differentiating factor in how the newer generations are currently growing up versus our parents and people alive before the 21st century. While our parents grew up playing outside and walking to school for 40 minutes in the snow, a lot of Generation Z is forming connections digitally, especially after a global pandemic. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through a deep dive on how social media is actually affecting our generation's brains. Actually, I'm not a brain psychologist. Is that a thing? Brain? What's the word? Irrelevant. The other day I made a TikTok talking about the Generation Z identity crisis and pretty much went over how our generation is literally going through an identity crisis because we're fucking weird. So today I'm going to be talking in depth about this theory and also answering some questions from my social media, so go follow them. But before I begin, I have to make a disclaimer. I am not a psychologist. I don't know what's going on in your brain. I am not responsible for any mental health issues this video might cause you. This is not a black and white issue. It doesn't really have a concrete answer. I'm just talking. Subscribe. That being said, enjoy the video. As we know, Gen Z is the first generation to grow up with social media at our fingertips, and I know this is the start of any like boomer hate video on Zoomers, but this is not that video, okay? We get it, technology bad, books good. This is not that video, okay? I do believe the benefits of this type of society outweigh the negatives, but I'm pretty sure we can all agree that we are the most disconnected, connected generation like of all time, and I don't think we've ever seen this. I mean, how would I know? I didn't grow up in like the 1800s. Hear ye, thou generation S fucking weird. S fucking weird? Bitch, I'm not was that Spanish? But you know, let's compare our generation to the generations before us. Let's say Generation X. It doesn't matter if you were 6 years old or 16 years old growing up in the 80s, the collective experience was very similar. You had rock and roll, you had those super crazy outfits and like the crazy hair. And those generational trends is exactly what teenagers growing up in the 80s based their identity around. You ever wonder how old people have the same exact, vibe for the most part?
Natalie, you can't generalize old people.
Well, no, seriously, like people from Generation X have the same exact vibe. They cannot use an iPhone for anything, and they use their iPhone like this. Any of y'all's parents do that? Enough. But I want y'all to answer this question. What connects all of Generation Z but the internet? Seriously, I'm waiting. The only thing that I feel is connecting Generation Z is the fact that we're all going through a really weird pandemic and all got our high school taken away from us pretty much. And I'm not talking about the older parts of Generation Z, but that's exactly the issue, okay? I can't relate to old parts of Generation Z, and I cannot relate to young parts of Generation Z. I was born in 2003, okay? I'm 18 years old. I cannot relate to 3 years above my age and 3 years below my age. People born in 2000 and 2006, I can't relate to you really. I can relate to older generations a little bit more because here's my theory. My theory as to why I can relate to older Generation Z a little bit more is because I didn't grow up with an iPhone. I didn't get my first iPhone until I was 13 years old, and I know for older Generation Z, they're like, oh my god, that's literally insane. But personally, I see like 9-year-olds walking around with iPhones, and I question what millennials are doing to raise their kids. But to group me in with kids from 2010, are you crazy? Are you on drugs? I cannot relate to anybody who is born past 2006, okay? And the reason I think this is because I experienced the pandemic right as I was about to graduate high school. Quarantine happened my junior year, and all it did for me was sped up my graduation process. I decided to graduate early, and it got me on track for my life. But for someone who was in, let's say, freshman year of high school, it really messed up their education. Or even someone who was in 6th grade at the time. I don't relate to you. But why is that, all right? Let's go a little deeper. Y'all notice how hard it is to retain a viewer's attention on YouTube nowadays? Hey, I know you're scrolling on your phone right now at the same exact time as watching my... hey, pay attention! Or Cash App or Venmo me. Back in the good old days on YouTube, all you had to do to be a YouTuber was post the most low quality, recorded on a Nokia, racist blackface video, and you'd be viral. Too soon? Please don't demonetize me, but now I can't even do anything without adding some quirky sound effect or some zoom in or some fucking explosion. Like, what are y'all on? And that is because of this thing called attention shifting, all right? And if you're still on your phone, calling you out, if you're still on your phone, you are literally doing that right now by scrolling on TikTok at the same exact time as watching my video. Now, attention shifting is that thing social media apps use to keep you engaged for longer. We all know how the algorithm works. You like a video, you see more of that video. And the reason that TikToks and Reels are so effective is because it literally does it for you. Like, you don't have to look for a specific video like on YouTube. All you have to do is open the app and it's content. You just scroll. Have y'all ever opened TikTok and then before you know it, it's literally nighttime? Like, you literally spent the entire day just scrolling on TikTok? Yeah, I have. It's great. I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is mindlessly scroll and lose my brain cells. However, this type of content came with a price. Trends are coming and going at an even faster rate than before. And it's great because we have a lot of content, but when you're a teenager and you're trying to form your identity, you tend to do it around those trends. You know, like going back to your mom in the 80s, doing that hairstyle, you know, listening to rock and roll, doing all of that. Those are the trends that form your identity. And now what I've personally seen with kind of like the middle of Generation Z, I'd say the teenagers of Generation Z right now, is that they are forming their identity around these trends, but they are simultaneously changing those identities all the time. And now I'm not going to say all of them because, you know, how a healthy identity forms really just depends on your own mental state and your own predispositions. I'd say someone who is neurodiverse is way more likely to form themselves around these trends and constantly change themselves to them. But I don't think it's only happening to neurodiverse people. I think it's happening to a lot of teenagers, and I think we are all going through an identity crisis. Because the second that you form your identity around a trend, it leaves. It's no longer cool. And when you're a teenager, all you want to be is accepted by society. And what do you do when that trend that you literally formed your identity around is no longer accepted? Well, you change it. I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, you are a product of your own environment, and that includes the content you watch. And I think we can all agree, some of the content on TikTok is absolute dog shit. Not to be judgmental, but I think we can all agree that there's a lot of questionable content online. And if you're indulging this content every single day or you get on the wrong side of TikTok, that might be a little bit of a problem, especially when you're forming your identity around those ideologies. What I fear is teenagers not actually taking the time or having the energy to look up and fact check certain things. Because what we are seeing with this generation is we take things at face value. I'd say our generation specifically loves to take shit at face value, you know? They don't like using other things like cryptocurrency or some shit. No, not funny? Okay. For example, the self-diagnosis of serious mental illnesses due to misinformation on TikTok. There was actually a study conducted that found that over half of the information on ADHD TikTok is misleading, and I actually want to make an entire video dedicated to ADHD TikTok. I personally have a lot to say because I do struggle with ADHD on a daily basis. It's very frustrating to me because I do see a lot of misinformation about ADHD on TikTok, and not that ADHD TikTok can't be used to help some people fight some certain symptoms, but when younger audiences are viewing that and genuinely believing that ADHD is having a messy room or forgetting your keys sometime or just being really quirky, especially how ADHD in girls is specifically viewed. And what I found is ADHD in girls is often passed off as being quirky, so a lot of girls can relate to those symptoms. But if you do believe you have ADHD, I do recommend trying to actually get a diagnosis for it. Of course, use the things online and use your resources to see if you do have it. I don't think doing something like taking a quiz or researching about the topic is harmful at all. I think you should do that before you get a diagnosis so you know what you're getting into. But this is where I'm going to get into my own experiences with the Generation Z identity crisis, now sharing with you guys that I'm neurodiverse. So this experience might not apply to everyone because I obviously have ADHD and I might look at social media a lot differently than someone else. Neurodiverse individuals are more likely to have a social media addiction, and at one point I totally had a social media addiction. I would literally not get off my phone. I was literally scrolling for hours on my phone. And what I was actually using TikTok for and using YouTube videos for was I was trying to steal certain personalities and try to kind of make my own. And what I found with myself was I would kind of copy other people's personalities because I was just so insecure with my own personality. And that's a really, really common trait of ADHD or being neurodiverse. And what I ended up actually doing was I started making, types of high schooler videos. And when I really look back at it, that was literally just me compartmentalizing things and trying to fit in, because social situations always gave me so much anxiety. It wasn't even funny. If you've been following me for a while, this is on my old account that was banned at 500,000. I would literally just stereotype people like point blank, and I would say the most like judgmental, mean stuff. I'd be like,
If you wear these shoes, you're a fucking nerd. If you're the really quiet kid who smells like Doritos, you need a shower.
like, I don't know. So this is me taking accountability. If I hurt anyone with my stereotyping, I'm sorry. That content was really ignorant. Be who you want to be, hang out with who you want to hang out with. It really doesn't matter as long as you're happy. However, back to my original point, people who are secure in their sense of identity might pick up certain trends and ignore others, while someone who is maybe neurodiverse or has mental illness might not do that and might actually just be taking in those things. For example, I want to talk about self-improvement TikTok too. What I noticed with myself was I used self-improvement TikTok in order to tear myself down and rebuild myself. It was just like a constant cycle of me changing identities in order to achieve this like perfect version of myself, which you're not gonna achieve. You're never gonna reach that perfect version of yourself. How you actually achieve that perfect version of yourself is by accepting whatever flaws you have in the present moment. You're not gonna see something that you're not meant to see. If you're trying to improve yourself, you can't force yourself to hate certain aspects of yourself and replace them with other things. Don't get me wrong, self-improvement TikTok and mental health TikTok really helped me understand some certain parts of myself, but it really matters the headspace you're in when you're receiving certain advice, because the state you're in can determine whether you use it for helpful or harmful reasons. And I think that's really important when we're talking about mental health or someone's struggles that they're going through. Sometimes being on social media, you might hear an ideology or an idea that you're not in the right mental space to actually think about correctly. For example, with spiritual TikTok, I feel like some can actually get into psychosis based on just some of the things that spiritual TikTok promotes, but you are inevitably responsible for checking in on your mental health and being like, am I okay to be on social media right now? Because sometimes it can be really toxic. So much of our generation seems to be going through different mental struggles at this time due to quarantine, and I guess just the times changing, that it's really difficult to make sure that someone's on the right track that you are. You might be doing great with your mental health and then someone else might not be. So there's a really big disconnect between people who are actually mentally struggling and those who aren't. And if you aren't mentally struggling right now, try to help out some of your friends that are. Check in on people. Being a part of Generation Z made me feel like I needed to be a certain way or understand certain trends or have certain collective experiences. And one of those collective experiences was social media. And if you didn't have social media and you were like, I don't feel like doing that, the second the pandemic hit, it was really hard not to, because that was only like your only connection to the outside world. Being on social media is like being in an echo chamber of everyone's self-deprecating, self-improving, or plain old self-centered thoughts. And what I'm realizing that a lot of us lack in social media is actually being social. Like we're literally just hermits and we're all just interacting with each other on a screen, but we're not actually forming real connections. Tell me if I'm off base, but do you ever text someone and you're like, this isn't real? Like, you're not a real person I'm texting right now. Like, I will ignore text or just not respond to text or forget to respond to text, not because I'm actually trying to ignore the person or make them feel bad, just because sometimes it's just too much for me. But if you call me, I'm obviously not gonna like stop talking to you mid-sentence, If you ask me a question in person, I'm obviously going to respond to that question. But when it comes to texting, it's just so difficult for me to be like, okay, let me respond to this text, and then I'll just forget about it. You cannot make that be your only sense of self-worth, because at one point during quarantine, like that's really all I had. I didn't really have too many friends. All I had was my outlet, and I relied on it too much. So when I got banned at 500K, it literally felt like my whole entire world was taken away from me, even though it wasn't. And I genuinely think that was the universe being like, hey, come back to center, focus on other things besides social media in your life. I think it's very important to have other hobbies and other things you do outside of social media if you don't really have that many friends, seriously, go participate in something. Like, seriously, there's a group of people out there who understand you, have the same exact feelings as you, and probably have a lot in common with you. It's just the matter of like actually going out and finding them. And you can find them online too. I literally moved in with my internet friends. You can find authentic connections online as well. But if you find those authentic connections, seriously, keep them close. Reach out, check in on people, check in on yourself. Like, if you feel like you've been scrolling too much on social media, it might be time to cut back and kind of like ask yourself what you can do to limit your screen time. I literally have my screen time limited, like every single day I have my screen time limited, so I don't go on my social media too much. I know this sounds cheesy, but just be yourself. Don't try to form your identity around anything that isn't authentic to you. I'm gonna go on the comments of that video and kind of answer some questions that people have. To be honest, I thought I was a Gemini. See, we'll literally call it anything. We'll call it being a Gemini, we'll call it being neurodiverse, we'll call it having BPD. Like, either way, it's whatever. I think our era just wants to have a defining moment so bad. It's like we're too self-aware that we're in an era and it feels forced. Oh my God, that's so true. That is so true. I feel like so much is going on in the world that we're just like overwhelmed as fuck. And when anyone asks us like what we're doing with our life, we're like, what? Like, I'm supposed to do something with my life? Oh my God. It feels like most Gen Z interactions have been pushed to online platforms, especially since the pandemic. It's harder to go out and meet fellow Gen Zs. Like, I don't know if it's a symptom or a cause, but I feel like it's definitely tied in with what you're saying. We're really a much lonelier generation. I completely agree. I think the pandemic had a lot to do with the way we socialize now. Why are we socially inept now? Like, it was a huge shock to me when I went to my first party after being in a pandemic for so long. It was so weird. I just didn't know how to socialize, and it was really overstimulating and overwhelming. Trends aren't responsible for your identity. The people you interact with make you who you are. But we also went through an entire pandemic and had to quarantine. So someone you interacted with on a daily basis were the people you looked up to online influencers. So those influencers make trends and thus make your identity, and depending on what side of TikTok you're on, if you're constantly scrolling on TikTok, I'd say that's your identity. People don't develop ADHD, you're born with it or you're not. That is true, and the reason I actually mentioned ADHD in this video was because there's a lot of misinformation on TikTok right now, and some people might self-diagnose. And from TikTok videos, you might suspect that you have ADHD, but I do highly recommend actually looking into it and getting a diagnosis, because suspecting you have a disorder and actually having a disorder are two separate things. I feel like our generation was made to test on. Like, we're some sort of guinea pigs, and we're all falling for it in some way, literally. Like, I feel like not one person in Generation Z is, like, unharmed by what's going on in the world right now. Like, even if you don't have trauma, like, within your family, you have trauma from going through a whole-ass pandemic. Like, I just think it's super interesting to think about. The worst part is that we all collectively know this, but we're all afraid to actually do something about it. Exactly, because we fear missing out. That's another huge thing. We are constantly in fear of missing out of things on social media that we're all like actually addicted to it. Like, that's what makes us addicted to it. The fear of missing out, the fear of not being on the new trend, the fear of not actually feeling like you're a part of Generation Z. We should be Generation FOMO. See, exactly. Without further ado, that's where I'm going to end this video off. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and let me know down in the comments what you think about this. Is Generation Z going through an identity crisis? Because I think so. Be sure to follow my social medias and click that bell to be notified the next time I post a YouTube video. Without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, you guys.